minutes for us, probably a little over an hour. Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission's hearing on artificial intelligence and consequences for human rights. As a reminder to those in the audience, I want to encourage you to please turn off your phones and electronic devices or set them to silent. My interest in today's topic is twofold. As co-chairman of the commission, I'm interested in key trends in human rights, and as a member of the House Subcommittee on Research and Technology, I'm also a watcher of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. Much has been written about artificial intelligence, or AI for short. AI is not one single technology, but a whole new class of programs that will fundamentally change how computers process information. Even though AI technology is relatively new, it's already profoundly affecting fields as diverse as healthcare, education, law enforcement, sales, and many others. In the right hands, AI technologies have the power to do profound good by saving lives and reducing the cost of essential services. As some of our panelists will note, AI even has potential to be a powerful tool to help advance the work that human rights defenders are doing. Unfortunately, as we have learned time and again, there is no such thing as a technology that is exclusively used for good causes. In the wrong hands, AI has the potential to negatively affect many aspects of our lives, and that does include in human rights. In remarks I recently delivered to the European Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights, I stated, and I quote, "There have been numerous press reports of the massive deployment of surveillance technologies against Uyghurs in China, including the use of artificial intelligence software and facial recognition software," end quote. The Chinese government's tactics against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province has been a laboratory for cutting-edge surveillance technology that truly is Orwellian. And the repercussions of that misuse of technology could extend far beyond China. This hearing is designed to discuss those broader repercussions and to explore ways that these threats can be, if not controlled or totally prevented, at least countered in meaningful ways. Because while many have already begun to discuss ways to prevent the unethical use of AI from a national security standpoint, these conversations have rarely addressed international human rights. Recent news items about the misuse of social media and other internet tools to gather massive amounts of information and make surprisingly accurate predictions based on that information have raised privacy concerns. Some of that misuse involves AI tools. These same tools could be used by abusive regimes to single out political opponents or to track and harass human rights defenders. And once the AI genie is out of the bottle, it could give non-state actors an unprecedented ability to commit human rights violations normally associated with national governments. That raises some of the fundamental questions of this hearing. What are the ways that AI could be abused to violate internationally recognized human rights? Are there ways to prevent AI from being used for such abuses? What is the role of the U.S. government or any government to either prevent or mitigate the use of AI to repressing human rights? What are the responsibilities and what's the role of the technology industry to prevent the misuse of their technologies for human rights abuses? Even if governments and the tech industry try to prevent or counteract human rights abuses enabled by artificial intelligence, does the borderless nature of the modern internet doom such efforts to only a limited scope? I'd like to thank our distinguished witnesses for coming today to address these concerns. We do appreciate your presence here as we discuss these important topics. Amnesty International could not send a panelist today, but I thank them for submitting a statement for the record that, among other things, describes the Toronto Declaration, which addresses the risk of human rights harms associated with AI. I'd also like to thank the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University in England, which has submitted a statement for the record. These statements will be available on the Commission's website. With that, I'd like to move to our panelists, and grateful again for their willingness to be with us today. First, we've got Samir Goswami, who works with NGOs, government alliances, and businesses to develop technology-enabled ethics supply chain initiatives and programs. He's an independent consultant with past and current clients that include the United Way Worldwide, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Ethical Trading Initiative, the City of Houston, Humanity United, ISRA Institute, and Mobile Accord. Thank you for being here. We also have Paul Schar here, a senior fellow and director of the Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. He is the author of Army of None, Autonomous Weapons and the Future of War, which was published just very recently in April of 2018. Also grateful to have Professor Kenneth Anderson, who teaches and writes in the area of business and international law public international law and governance, law of war and armed conflict, and most recently, law and regulation of emerging technologies, particularly automation, robotics, and AI. He's published extensively on national security law topics, particularly counterterrorism, drone warfare, and autonomous weapons. And he also serves as book review editor of the National Security and Law website, Lawfare. So with that, and he is a professor of law at the American University. So again, thank you to each of our panelists. I'm going to ask each of you if you would present your testimony, and then we will move to questions at that time. So Mr. Kasewama, if you'd start us.
Thank you, Chairman Hubbard.
Can you make sure your microphone is on or pull it good and close?
Well, thank you, Chairman Hulgren, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. While AI has great potential to uphold and promote human rights, conversely, it can also be used to suppress it. A primary thought for consideration is that while AI has tremendously improved our ability to process the world around us, we don't often act upon the insights that we glean from it. That is, while machines may help us understand problems and human rights issues better, we, the humans, have to develop the political will to intervene. Unfortunately, this is something we don't do enough of in the human rights space. AI is a collection of technologies that involve the processing of very large amounts of data. Through machine learning, which is a core component of AI, machines can be programmed to imitate certain ways our human brains process information. That is, the machine can be taught to observe, identify, and classify. It could even be taught to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. AI can be used to uncover human rights violations that many workers face around the world in the factories, farms, and mines that they labor in. The U.S. Department of Labor finds that 139 goods from 75 countries may be made from child or forced labor. A U.S. company may have thousands of suppliers around the globe, and all vary on how they treat their workers. Most U.S. companies have codes of conduct that they expect each one of those suppliers to abide by, and use audits to verify that those factories are indeed doing so. These audits, close to 50 to 100 pages per factory, multiplied by thousands of factories around the world, generates lots of data. Supply chain managers can use computing technology to process this vast amount of audit data to flag issues. However, these audits can be forged, or they could be susceptible to other influences. The erroneous data can contaminate an AI-enabled analysis that may not then paint a complete and accurate picture of whether the supplier is acting ethically. AI-enabled systems can conduct outside validation to complement audit data through accessing and processing other information sources such as news reports, court filings, public records, and other materials associated with that supplier. Furthermore, workers can also leave a data footprint, and AI can be used in real time to scan social media, chat forums, message boards, or public comment websites for any references to those suppliers left by the workers. All these various streams of data can be analyzed together to provide an independent human rights assessment of a supplier's labor practices. However, this capability in this example can also be flipped for illicit purposes. Machine learning and AI can be used to comb through workers' social media posts to target union organizers or those a state or factory owner may deem to be a troublemaker. Facial recognition technology can be coupled with AI to find and target migrant workers or human rights defenders who are challenging repressive labor regimes. And predictive capabilities might flag workers and subject them to arbitrary detention or harassment based on the AI-informed suspicion that they might challenge employment practices or poor working conditions. In addition, we also need to ensure that AI does not just generate wealth for a few at the expense of others. Increased automation can lead to a decrease in certain types of jobs, displace low-wage workers, and depress wages. A 2016 White House report finds that anywhere from 9% to 47% of jobs over the next 2 decades could be disrupted by AI and automation. These impacts will be borne on the shoulders of low-income women and migrants who are already some of the world's most vulnerable. The federal government should invest in AI for good. However, we also need to act upon the insights that AI and machine learning deliver to us. Our investment criteria should not just be that the technology was developed or deployed. We should measure the human outcomes that were achieved. That is, did the good that we were seeking in an AI for good application actually happen? For example, we can use AI to help pinpoint exactly which factory might utilize child labor, but that insight is wasted if we don't respond, and we deliberately ignore our ethical obligations to those children. Unfortunately, while some progress is being made, U.S. companies are simply not doing enough to act upon the technology-enabled insights on labor abuses that they have access to. There is thus tremendous opportunity for the U.S. Department of Labor, USAID, the State Department, DOJ, CPB, and other entities to use AI and machine learning to verify how workers tied to U.S. public and private supply chains are being treated. These insights can be used to apply laws already on the books that prohibit forced and child labor made goods to enter the U.S., or to enforce trade agreements that have often ignored labor practices in place. The U.S. government needs to act upon such technology-gleaned insights by compelling companies to drive supply chain improvements, enable law enforcement to prosecute those who abuse human rights, and press other governments to uphold workers' rights. Civil society and industry are also taking steps to address these issues. For example, the International Corporate Accountability Roundtable is mapping the disruptions to labor markets that automation and robotics can lead to, and the Partnership on AI is bringing the technology industry together with civil society and human rights organizations to collectively identify solutions and safeguards to various AI-influenced challenges. In conclusion, I strongly believe that AI has and can have a tremendous impact on human rights. We need to ensure that the wealth that AI will generate will be shared broadly and not exacerbate existing economic disparities. The application of AI should also be measured by the outcomes it produces and whether those violate human rights principles. Most of all, we need to act upon the insights we glean. Technology is just a tool to help us understand a problem better. It is not a replacement for the political will that is needed to drive change. Thank you for your time and leadership and the opportunity to address this commission.
Mr. Goswami, thank you so much. Next, Mr. Shar.
Thank you, Chairman Holmgren, for inviting me to testify today. Recent years have seen rapid advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning. AI tools are now being applied to a range of industries and will have similar applicability to human rights. Artificial intelligence is a general-purpose enabling technology, much like electricity or computers. AI tools can be used for a variety of applications, including data classification, anomaly detection, prediction, and optimization. These tools will be used by state and non-state actors for a variety of purposes, some of which will no doubt include suppressing human rights. Other uses may help to enhance human rights or fight against repressive regimes. It is not my intention today to estimate what the net effect of AI technology will be for human rights. Rather, I would like to walk through some potential use cases to illustrate some of the possibilities as AI technology becomes more widely used. In the hands of a repressive state with access to large data sets about its population, AI tools could be used to further increase state control. Automated facial recognition technology combined with security cameras could make 1984-style continuous monitoring feasible. Combined with readily available digital data collected through computers and smartphones, AI tools could be comprehensively used to monitor a person's behavior, communications, likes, and desires at a scale that not even Orwell could have imagined. People living in the digital age create a cornucopia of data: smartphone geolocation, browser history, web search history, online purchases, contacts, social media engagement, email and text message content, telephone calls, and more. Whoever has access to this data has tremendous insight not only into a person's past, but also the ability to predict their future behavior. Without AI tools, however, it is hopelessly impractical to manage this data at scale. Artificial intelligence makes much of this data more discoverable through data classification tools that can recognize faces, identify human emotions, translate voice to text, translate languages, and process language. AI tools also make it feasible to analyze and process this data at scale. This means that the kind of intrusive monitoring that would have in the past been extremely time-consuming and resource-intensive can now be done quickly and at scale, allowing more extensive and intrusive monitoring of a population. Moreover, large data sets can be aggregated to generate statistically valid predictions. By learning from data across an entire population and then applying this to readily available information about an individual, AI tools could be used to make predictions about that individual's preferences or behavior, political, financial, sexual, or other. AI tools could be used to not only monitor a population, but predictively crack down on would-be dissidents. At the same time, there are a number of features of AI tools that would make them very powerful allies for those fighting repressive regimes. AI systems embed expertise within software itself, lowering the bar for the skills needed for a given capability. One does not need to spend years learning chess anymore to play at the level of a grandmaster, for example. One can merely download a chess app for free. Similarly, AI systems will put greater abilities in the hands of non-state groups and individuals. Smartphones already turn surveillance tools against the state, allowing citizens to record abuses by authorities. AI tools such as embedded object recognition or facial recognition in the hands of everyday citizens can make it even easier to identify abusers and hold perpetrators to account. A core feature of information technology is that it renders the cost of copying and transmitting information close to zero. One of the consequences of this is that it is difficult to keep information secret. While this is true for personal information, it is also true for state secrets. Individuals have accessed and released large tranches of government secrets on a scale that was impossible in the pre-digital era. The ease with which information freely flows in the digital age is a hindrance to repressive regimes that thrive on secrecy. AI tools will make it easier for individuals and non-state organizations to process and analyze this data. Earlier this year, it came to light that heat maps of jogging routes from runners wearing geolocating Fitbits could be used to identify secret U.S. military and intelligence bases overseas. Journalists quickly discovered that these could de-anonymize this data and actually identify specific users who had run routes as well as previous locations these users had visited. This analysis was done manually, but AI tools could make it easier to process this data at scale, including linking it with other data sets such as social media profiles. This kind of technology can make it easier for many to shine a light on state activity. It is not clear at this stage whether AI tools will benefit states or individuals more, but it is clear that they are powerful and will be used by actors both to repress and enhance human rights. I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shar. Professor Anderson.
I'm honored to appear before this commission.
Can you make sure your microphone's on as well? I'm sorry. Push. There it
Yes, thank you. I'm honored to appear before this commission in part because Representative Tom Lantos was someone that I knew early on in my career in the 1980s, and he was a man of unshakable integrity and commitment to these issues, so it's a pleasure for me to be able to appear here. And I want to focus ultimately on the question of what I regard are important but limited tools that the U.S. government has in order to try and have an effect on where these technologies are used, how they're used, and ways in which to try and minimize their use in human rights abuse in particular. And with specific reference to authoritarian regimes engaged in the internal repression of their own populations, but specifically excluding China and the countries that are very large, have got sophisticated programs and really stand on their own. So it's, in one sense, a question of the follow-on from a place like China to other places in the world that are internally repressive. Want to start by talking about the technology and the specific technology that we should be concerned with, I believe, for this kind of purpose. The first distinction I'd make is that for the purposes we're talking about here, we're really talking about software and not physical robotics, and thus I'm not talking, for example, and I don't think any of us have been talking about automated weapons systems and those kinds of physical robots. Instead, we're talking about software agents, and within that category, we are talking mostly today about another subdivision within that. We tend almost to take for granted the extensive computerization and the programs that wind up operating hugely important automated systems in our lives, everything from getting the Social Security checks out to how telecommunications switching devices work. And that stuff has been around and is developing, and we somewhat tend to take it for granted in relation to the new kid on the block, that really what we're talking about is machine learning, and much of the controversy centering around a subset of that called deep learning. And these are essentially pattern recognition programs that are able to work their way through vast data sets and to be able to identify correlations that can be extracted from this. Again, they have had some just enormously powerful successes in recent years, including their role in the AlphaGo and in the Go game, which beat the experts, using in part these kind of technologies. But we also become increasingly aware, particularly within the tech community, as they start looking at how these kinds of machine learning and deep learning programs go across this data without necessarily a completely fixed rule set for what it is they are looking to extract and how they are doing it. and have discovered that the learning process, which is essentially a process of reinforcement, can and in important cases does wind up reinforcing some of the things that we regard as socially abhorrent, illegal. Machine learning programs that produce utterly racist results from data that just looking at it, you wouldn't necessarily think that that's where it would wind up going. So there's been a much increased awareness, I'd say, within the technology community that there is an important role for human beings to be looking from the standpoint of both common sense and ethical sense at what is generated out of these kinds of programs. Nevertheless, those are the things that we're talking about because they have made the greatest strides, particularly in facial recognition and software related to surveillance of enormous importance to such authoritarian regimes. Now, one of the key points about those kinds of software programs, such as facial recognition, surveillance, the automation of those kinds of processes, is that they are essentially going to be off-the-shelf programs with equally legitimate roles in policing, in national security, and a host of just things in ordinary commerce. So they're going to be there. The problem is there's very little that separates what that program is used for legitimately from what that program is used for illegitimately in the way of human rights repression, and therefore the question of what one does about it by policy isn't simply a matter of sticking a label on it and say, this is a bad AI because it can be used illegitimately. Pretty much all of them can be. The point that I would like to wind up on, however, goes to the question of U.S. government policy. And I've been sweating over this one because I think the options are actually limited at this point. Traditional export control, licensing, that kind of control of it, I can't believe for a moment is actually going to be successful in something that is as universally available coming from places like China, Russia, and other places. Moreover, regimes may be perfectly happy not to have a perfectly tuned system in the sense that we would regard it as required for our legitimate uses, because they may not care about false positives. And I think Tom Lantos was aware of a case that came up in Guatemala. I'm not sure it was truly true, but of the Guatemalan military apparatus deciding they wanted to eliminate someone. They didn't know which someone it was a common name, and went through the telephone directory eliminating name after name after name, same name, different address. If you don't care about the false positives, then the off-the-shelf technology may be just fine for what it is you're looking to do. Now, the one bright point about this, I think, is that there is an opportunity, I believe, to work with the tech community in developing standards broadly under the name of ethical AI and AI ethics that will not solve the problem of illegitimate uses and the application of these technologies to evil ends, strictly speaking, but would have the ability to embed standards and norms that would make artificial intelligence programs more explainable and more transparent, among other things. And if that became common across the commercial applications of this, I believe there's some case that it would spill over and bleed over into other kinds of applications. That strikes me as one way in which one could look to go forward, but it is a very limited one. And on that depressing note, I will close.
Thank you, Professor Anderson. And I do have more questions for all of you, so we'll transition into some questions if that's all right. I'm going to start, Mr. Shar, with you, if I might. As you know, China is already using artificial intelligence to abuse human rights. Can you describe how the Chinese government is currently harnessing AI to the detriment of human rights and vulnerable populations, including their pernicious social credit system?
Sure, there are certainly aspects where China is using already facial recognition technology. I think there's been quite a bit of discussion about the social credit system. I want to separate for a moment kind of some of the hype surrounding media stories about it and then what it actually does. It's right now technologically relatively simple. It does not get to the place where they have access to large amounts of pooled personal data that is in fact aspirational as part of the system, but they do not currently have personal data included. It's more of an ecosystem of existing lists that exist, as well as there was for a period of time, although the contract has not been renewed, from the Chinese company Sesame, credit scores. It's predominantly oriented towards enforcement of existing Chinese laws and regulations, so that there are consequences for people for example, not paying court fines or following through on existing regulatory or legal sort of judgments. It exists as a set of lists. There's a number of different lists. Right now, most of these, at least at the centralized national level, are binary lists, so they're blacklists that a person might get on. The largest of these is the blacklist for the non-performance of legally binding judgments. As of last year, there were 8.8 million people who were blacklisted. Of course, in the total size of China, it's not massive, but a significant number of people. And then there are some localized sort of regional lists, some of which actually at the local level do involve scoring for people based on performance. So people have scores that might get positive points for things like taking care of the elderly or obeying local laws and regulations, and they might lose points for things like drunk driving or littering or jaywalking or other things. The longer term aspirations of the system, I think there is some cause for concern that it might start to lay the foundations for some of the more intrusive and comprehensive social monitoring that we've talked about today.
Thanks. Professor Anderson, I wonder, you mentioned a lot of the challenges with these issues and the struggle that we've got ahead of us. I wonder, does the borderless nature of modern computing make it impossible to create effective international regulations that would prevent the misuse of AI to violate international human rights? What's your thoughts on that? How would we even go about this, because it is not hindered by borders?
I think that the fact that it is borderless and the fact that many of these technologies are joined by hip with cyber technologies of one kind or another make the ability to stop it at the border, make it difficult. And ironically, the place that has got the greatest likelihood of being able to stop it at the border will be China when it comes to dealing with incoming stuff from the outside world. I would actually flag in this regard something that has been discussed as the entire sort of question about Russian interference in the election and all of that stuff has come up. And I'm referring to Vladimir Putin's overture to the U.S. government that perhaps we ought to have a sort of declared non-interference policy, which I think raises enormous questions related to this kind of AI and related to the connection to cyber. In particular because it winds up essentially saying we're not going to engage in democracy promotion kind of efforts across borders. So and supporting civil society groups in, say, Russia and society. So I think that there are enormous risks to be present going down that route. And finally, I'd say with regards to international regulation in particular, I think that that's extraordinarily dangerous to contemplate because I don't at this point believe that there is a majority of the countries in the world that matter technologically that actually would favor the kind of regime that we would be talking about.
Interesting. Mr. Goswami, if I could address to you, we've talked about some of the negatives, keep talking about quite a bit of that too over the next few minutes, but I also wondered if you could talk about how U.S. agencies maybe could use AI to promote human rights. Are U.S. companies doing enough with the technology available to them, including AI, to ensure their overseas operations are not harming human rights?
The short answer is no, we're not doing enough, and yes, we should be doing more, and we can be doing more. I think to approach that question, I would say that AI is a technologies that's helping us analyze issues better and really dig down to the deepest data point to really understand where we should intervene, et cetera. Behind all that is our ability and our political will to intervene, and I think that's where we're lacking. We don't lack the technical capacity or capability, we're lacking in the political will. I think there's a lot that the Department of Labor can continue to do. There's a lot that USAID, the State Department, Department of Justice can continue to do to use these new data means and data collection and analytical means to see how workers are being treated in their supply chains and U.S. supply chains overseas. And we have enough tools right now that exist even without AI to know that. We can survey workers through mobile phones. We can ingest an NGO data sheet or a survey that an NGO does across the world within 2 minutes and have it in our desktop here in DC. The point is we have to act upon it. And we have to bring it up at these hearings, but we also have to put pressure on agency heads to use that information to act upon it. There are lots of a few different examples of how machine learning in particular has enabled supply chain managers to find data from various different sources to take a comprehensive look at how a supplier is operating, whether they have legal issues, whether there have been complaints made, et cetera, by workers against them. There's really not that much compulsion that compels a supply chain manager to take that and do something about it, whether it's getting their legal counsel involved, whether it's putting sanctions against that supplier, whether it's renegotiating their contract, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we need more of. And I think that's where the U.S. government can step in and compel companies to do more of that.
Thank you. Mr. Shar, your colleague Elsa Kania also noted that China has ambitions to lead the world in AI by 2030. Does it make a difference for human rights outside of China if Chinese companies develop a lead in AI technologies? If so, why?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think it does in a number of ways. One is that the surest way to influence this technology is to be the global leader. The U.S. has really had this in current information technologies by being the first mover, by being the global leader in information technologies. Inherent in much of the technology that's proliferated around the world are embedded American values, particularly in this case, the values of the engineers who develop them in terms of things like openness. And whoever is the global leader in AI, their implicit values will be embedded in some of this technology in terms of things like privacy, fairness, transparency, explainability. It's certainly in America's interest to remain a global leader, not just for AI technology used in the United States, but so that the AI technology used globally is influenced from sort of an American perspective. I also think it's really critical because the actual instantiation of some of these technologies can often end up having backdoors or surreptitious means of people spying and collecting information. There was recently a recall within the U.S. Department of Defense of drones manufactured by China, a Chinese company called DJI. The Defense Department did not get into a whole lot of detail about why they had ordered their forces to sort of shelve these drones, but there were a lot of public, openly available reports by journalists that this company had been recording geolocation data and audio files from these drones. So I think certainly it's a major concern, and the U.S. will be well served to stay a leader in this space.
Thanks, Mr. Shar. Professor Anderson, you talked about really maybe the impossibility or even the reality that there shouldn't necessarily be international regulations right now on this, but I wonder what you do recommend, what can be done to address the threats posed by human rights to human rights by the misuse of AI. Is this a case where we should focus on proactively incorporating human rights prevention into technology when it's developed, or are there more questions of developing counter technology to circumvent the negative effects of AI after they emerge? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I don't believe that formal exercises in international rulemaking will wind up being useful. I believe they would be profoundly counterproductive for the reason that I mentioned, which is basically I don't think that the direction that the world is headed globally is one that favors the values that Paul Shar has mentioned here. I also wind up thinking that there are an awful lot of countries out there, and the ones that we particularly have in mind here in this hearing, where it's a feature, not a bug. If you've got a button you can flip that basically says, now it's going to be non-transparent, now it's going to be sort of limited within, nobody's going to be able to look at it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that realistically, it's not just on practical grounds, but on moral grounds that I think it's a mistake to be looking at trying to talk about international regulation of this kind of thing. And instead, the far more important approach is the one that the U.S. has had to date, and it's really what you've said, namely that it's remaining the leader in the field, and to the extent possible, allowing values that are important to Americans and many other liberal democracies across the globe to remain part of the design features of these things. And it sounds weird to be talking about a technology that I've described as equally usable for legitimate as illegitimate uses. But these fundamental design aspects, explainability, transparency, ability to have some idea if it looks like it's going wrong, all of these things are not necessarily things that you want if you're a repressive internal society. And so I think that remaining the leader in that way is actually the single most important thing that could be done.
Thanks, Professor. Mr. Goswami, can AI, we talked about turning on and off switches, basically, of features of these things. Wonder, and I assume it can, but can AI replicate human biases? How does this occur, and can it contribute to discrimination, and what might we be able to do about that? Can you make sure your microphone's on, too? I'm not sure if it is. Is it on?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yes, AI
There it is.
can replicate human biases. Simply put, it's like humans. Machines learn through repetition and through the data that you feed into it. So if you feed data that has some inherent biases into a machine, that's what it will replicate. For example, if you want your machine to identify things in an agricultural field, and in those images only brown people that look like me are in those fields, then the machine might assume that only brown people are farmers. And that's a very simple way of saying that, yes, biases can be replicated. That can have grave concerns for human rights. For example, if decisions are being made in the criminal justice field or other sectors, the data that is inputted, if it's biased, it can have negative repercussions for those people. For example, I think the city of Chicago piloted a project to use AI to determine outcomes of cases, whether people should bail or not, and they also used AI to see which areas of the city should get more police power. However, it turns out that the systems also pointed to African-American people, and African-American neighborhoods should get more police presence because the data that was being ingested to make them learn that was a result of some of the biased practices that we've seen and have been alleged as well. So yes, biases can be replicated by machines. I think it's important to, when we think about, well, what can be done about that, in any kind of AI decision-making process, whether it's you're applying for a mortgage or a credit card online to an automated system that's telling you where to police better, we have to look at the outputs to see if are those outputs being discriminatory and then why, and then unpack what data is building up those outputs. And then very simply put, those who are designing AI systems and those who are operating AI systems should reflect the diversity that we have as a society as well, so they're less likely that those biases will be replicated.
Thank you. Mr. Goswami, following up, what are some other examples of human rights organizations harnessing the power of AI to assist human rights defenders or promote human rights?
It's a good question, and I think the answer to that is a bit of offense and a bit of defense as well. We've touched upon human rights defenders who could be coming under threat by repressive regimes or other actors, and are often using simple technologies to encrypt their communications with one another or keep hidden from a digital footprint so that it doesn't pop up in a repressive regime. I'll give one example. When I was at Amnesty International USA a few years ago, we had access to about 30 years of very meticulously collected human rights data. Very well organized sheets of information about different human rights incidents and risks that have popped up over the past 30 years. We partnered with Purdue University and a nonprofit called DataKind, and we got some volunteer data scientists to pour through, I think it was 11 million lines and 11 million lines of data that we coupled with our existing current data on human rights risks that were coming in to see if we could predict an outcome, so a human rights crisis. And the tests that our volunteer data scientists did, with 80% or so accuracy, they were able to predict a binary outcome. You can imagine that that has a lot of potential for an organization, a large human rights organization, to look at data coming in and analyze that with past data to find patterns and warn human rights defenders of impending risks, or concentrate their resource into going after human rights hotspots, et cetera. So there's a lot of potential for it. It is a matter of resources as well. A lot of human rights organizations, a lot of human rights defenders are operating in very repressive environments with very little resources and access to technology as well. I don't think we should be distracted by the shiny object that is AI. There's also a lot of just everyday technology, such as secure communication, et cetera,
Right.
that human rights defenders can use with the right resources.
That's great. Thank you. I think all of you have referenced, maybe Mr. Shah, especially in your answers, of how important it is for America to lead, and I would maybe add on to that, to lead in AI ethically. So not only lead the technology, but also hopefully have that ethical voice as we're moving forward in that. I wonder any suggestions you'd have of how the U.S. government can boost its AI industry, and especially an ethical AI industry, and what I could be recommending to my colleagues of how do we best help that or push that.
Yeah, I think there are a number of tools that the government has at its disposal that we can generate as a society to help grapple with these things. Certainly, one of them is sparking a public conversation about some of these tools as we begin to see uses in a variety of contexts. There was just a news article today about facial recognition technology being used by Amazon, being used in police departments. So I think venues like this, where members of Congress or others can highlight things, bring these issues to bear, is very valuable. I think dealing with some of these concerns requires a cross-disciplinary conversation that brings together technology companies, policymakers, lawyers, ethicists, and others, and members from the general society at large. I think there are probably things the U.S. government could do in terms of R&D development, where there might be places where we say there's certainly strong private sector advantages to spend money on artificial intelligence. Government does need to invest to move this forward. But there might be narrow areas where we say it makes sense to have government funding and investment in certain particular aspects of AI. For example, say in more explainable AI, or things that are maybe more robust and reliable. Issues involving AI safety might be places where it would be very valuable to do that. I also think in general, the more that we can begin to have kind of this open dialogue with tech companies, there are certainly ways that Congress can do that. There are ways that the administration can do that. I would like to see a national AI strategy. I was encouraged by meeting an AI summit at the White House recently, bringing together tech companies. I'd like to see more of a continuous dialogue so that we have these conversations up front as technologies are being rolled out, that at least tech companies acknowledge what some of the potentials for misuse are, and we begin to discuss those collectively.
Do you think some of that, you said, there's already been some conversation there, but do you think American AI industry is focusing enough on how important it is for them and for us to lead in this ethical technology advancement in AI? Are the American AI companies recognizing their role in that? I would absolutely agree that we have more of a responsibility, I guess, to encourage that and push that. How much are they doing that already?
Yeah, I think there's more that could be done. For example, I was disappointed by the demonstration at Google recently using an AI that technologically was very impressive in terms of engaging with a human in natural speech. That there wasn't a discussion up front about some of these ethical issues. Now, Google backtracked very quickly afterwards, within a few days, saying, well, we wouldn't use this to try to manipulate or deceive people. We would put a disclaimer up front. I think that's positive that they adapted to the public response. But I think disappointing that we didn't see that from the outset from some of these companies, that they weren't raising these issues internally from the beginning before they brought it out publicly.
Thanks. Yeah, Professor Anderson.
To that what just been said, I think, is of enormous importance. And part of it is because it has to do with the culture of the tech industry itself, on American tech companies, but also tech companies abroad. And in the case of what we describe as AI ethics, there are kind of two layers of it. One would be stuff that you might just regard as good design ethics, the ability to look inside the black box and see how it operates. you can think of that as being AI ethics, but really it's only AI ethics because it hasn't been done, and there's been a sort of sense that it can't be done in various kinds of ways. But I think there are ways in which basic research could really go after that proposition. With regards to the general public, I think that one of the most important things that that government at all branches of government could do would be to de-enchant AI, demystify it, probably stop calling it artificial intelligence, because it isn't, as you said at the very beginning, it's a bunch of different technologies that don't necessarily share that much in common with each other. And in bringing it down to earth, talking about it in ways that make it concrete to people what the kinds of bad outcomes are. There is just something so mysterious to me about artificial intelligence, robotics, all these areas, that cause us to reach to these sort of either utopian fantasies on the one hand or dystopian sci-fi on the other, and getting it down to sort of brass tacks, I think, can go a long way to getting the public behind the idea that there are just concrete issues here which are going to have to be dealt with by law and regulation. Then finally, most concretely, would be, I think there has to be a discussion with the tech companies about their business in China, and about how it is that they are going to legitimately reconcile a very different system with things that we really object to, with their internal laws, but understanding that what those folks make and sell is going to go to all the other places that we're concerned about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you've touched on this, but specifically with when there's state actors who are abusing, using AI to abuse human rights, who do you think really does have the responsibility to take the lead in fighting against that? Is it individual governments? Is it international organizations or tech industry? Who do you think ought to do it, and who maybe has the best potential to have a positive impact on that?
Where it's state actors, I believe that it's the responsibility of government to take the lead. I don't think that one can really expect the global tech company headquartered in the United States, but with interests and shareholders and all of that stuff everywhere, to take the lead. And I also don't think that we ought to expect them to make the value judgments. I think we ought to expect them to carry out a certain bare minimum, and I think we certainly ought to expect that within the context of the tech world itself, that certain basics, you don't lie to your users about who's on the other end of the phone line. Those things I think one can expect the tech industry to do, but to make China policy, I don't think one can, or to make policy with regards to some other place, I don't think one can. And so I do think that it is government's responsibility. Again, it follows a theme that I've been saying here. I don't think that international organizations are capable of addressing it. They don't understand it, and I think that their interests at this point are completely fragmented.
As a law professor, do you think we need more laws here in America right now specifically to address this, or is it enough for us just to start the conversation and try and have, using our influence to impact China and other places, or do you think we need legislation in place?
I think, again, speaking as a law professor for myself only, I think that this is the wrong moment to be introducing laws. I think that this is the right moment for introducing regulations about self-driving cars and safety. But I think that one should start with the obvious cases where the risks are completely evident to us on the roads, and then adopt a very careful kind of go slow approach to see where laws would actually be useful. Now, domestically, I think that means to a large extent forbearing from bringing the full tools of law that could be brought to bear on specifically the tech industry. And the reason for that is that one would like ideally to see them internalize these kinds of ethics that go with a liberal democratic society into how they approach the tech design itself. And with regards to things that are overseas, I think that there will come a point in which we will be looking to impose sanctions on various people, and not just the kind that we've had with Russian companies and actors, or the Chinese PLA in relation to national security stuff. And in those regards, I think that we are going to have a difficult conversation given the level of economic entanglement.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Goswami?
Just to kind of to add to the notion of do we need laws, I think aside from that question, there are some existing instruments and principles that we should be abiding by also in this space. For example, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that were passed in 2011 amongst much fanfare and agreement in the global community, including business and governments around the world, especially the U.S. One of the core principles of the UNGPs is this notion of access to remedy. And back then it was probably envisioned that if it's a brick and mortar operation or if it's a company that's polluting a water system that a community engages in or relies upon, but we need to apply that also to the AI space as well. If a computing system led to a violation of civil rights or harm that was conducted by a company, then the same principle of access to remedy applies. A citizen should have the right to access a grievance mechanism where they can get remedy for how they were wronged, including in the AI space as well.
Go ahead.
If I may, on that one point, I think we certainly don't want to, overly strangle innovation in the United States, but I do think that there's one area where it's worth us beginning to have a conversation about legal or regulatory framework, and that has to do with using AI tools to impersonate humans. It's something that I think, would have sounded like science fiction a few years ago, maybe sounds still like science fiction today. Oh, that's something out in Blade Runner or something. But it's clear the technology makes it possible to do that today for things like certainly engagement on social media. There's a significant fraction of social media users, estimates vary, are Twitter bots or other types of bots, and as well as in now things like voice. And I think it's worth a conversation. There are many states where it's illegal to record a conversation with someone without two-party consent. I think it's worth having a conversation here about, not about whether it makes sense to have AI tools that can emulate human speech. That's very valuable to have human-based interaction, but to have tools that would deceive humans. And should there be some regulation there, if nothing else, to level the playing field for companies that will act responsibly, because they're concerned about their brand reputation, maybe they're concerned about ethics, to level that playing field with them and others who might not.
Great. I'm going to ask each of you in just a moment, if you wouldn't mind just doing a final close. And the challenge, I guess, is, and you've already touched on it in your testimonies and also answered to questions, but I guess just kind of wrapping it up in a package. One of the things, Professor Anderson, appreciate you bringing up Tom Lantos. He's someone who's a hero to me as well, and just an incredible mentor. But also, the other part of this original team was John Porter, congressman from Illinois, who was, it was my understanding, was kind of his idea for this Human Rights Commission and working with Tom Lantos. So all that to be said, one of the things I love about this, and I'm sorry my co-chairman Jim McGovern was not able to be with us today because I appreciate him so much. I respect him so much. I don't always agree with him, but that's okay. That is a good thing to have that give and take, as long as we have that basic respect for each other, and we absolutely do have that. And I think that was laid out by Tom Lantos and John Porter and others who were following in their footsteps. But as we saw from today, with the busy day of a lot of things going on, one of our primary objectives with the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission is to gather information and then to be able to get that to our colleagues of challenges of what ought we be doing and what ought we not be doing. And so I guess that is what I would ask in summation of what I can bring, certainly to my co-chairman, but also to my other colleagues who are on the commission and those who are not on the commission but care about the rights of humans here and around the world and potential threats or opportunities to help them. So if I could just ask you to kind of go down the line and maybe just a minute or two of summation of what I could bring from your perspective of the most important things we as members of Congress ought to do or ought to be aware of.
Well, thank you again for your leadership and for chairing this hearing and this topic. I think in summation, I'm going to bring up a story from Illinois. I used to be a lobbyist for the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and worked with you quite a bit when you were in the Springfield State House. And I remember it's probably 2007, 2008 when my colleagues partnered with the Illinois Department of Human Services to do the first ever statewide study on youth homelessness. And back then, they used the latest and greatest research technologies available to them to find out, where homeless youth were around the state. And it was such a detailed study that I think you could enter in a zip code and find out how many homeless youth were there. It was a very well done study. And I think they also came up with some numbers that for every for every 156 homeless youth, there was only one shelter bed.
Mhm.
And we thought, because this was in partnership with the state, that just knowing that would galvanize us into action and reprioritize resources. And some things did change, but homelessness amongst youth is still a major problem in Illinois. What AI has done and what other technologies has done is able to understand these issues better. It's cheapened the way we can collect this kind of information. We can really get to the pinpoint of what factors are leading to this problem. But at the end of the day, we have to act upon it. And we have existing laws, we have existing provisions on the books that can help us act towards human rights, just like we could have in Illinois as well. But we just need to do it. So one thing I would impress upon you and your colleagues is more political will to use the tools at our disposal to promote civil and human rights and to rectify the wrongs that have happened.
That's great. Thanks, Mr. Gasawami. Appreciate it. Mr. Shar.
Thank you. I do think that there are a number of steps the United States can do to help ensure that this technology is used in ways that are more likely to enhance human rights. We're at a place where there's a lot of uncertainty about how the technology will unfold or what it might be used for. In many ways, it's like trying to go back a few decades and imagine what computers and networks and smartphones might be used for. And we're not going to be able to imagine all of those, but there are concrete steps we could take today. One, as we discussed, is remaining a global leader in artificial intelligence. Things like investing in R&D, STEM education, a national strategy on AI would help. I think that shining a light on abuses that do happen in other countries would be very valuable. Keeping an eye on something like China's social credit system as it evolves and as they incorporate more personal data and how it's used. Publicly discussing these issues in our society, I think, are really vital. Reasonable people might disagree on how these tools are used. I think transparency in what the government is doing at a local, state, and federal level is really vital, as well as what private companies are, of course, doing with tremendous amounts of personal data that they have. As we discussed, I think there's more that the tech community could do to begin to think about ethics in this technology as they're developing it and before they roll it out. And there may be places where, as it matures, there are specific countermeasures or tools that might be able to develop and put in the hands of people to fight against repressive regimes, which may be valuable too. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Shar. Professor Anderson.
I would echo everything that's been said earlier here, and I guess I'd particularly stress the need to remain a leader in the tech industry. I don't know that that necessarily requires that we have a national strategy. I'm not sure that industrial policy has worked out all that well for other countries that have decided this is what they're going to do. But even if it's only informal, some sense that we ought to be the leader and ought to enable the conditions by which to lead. The second thing goes specifically to Congress. I think that it was of enormous importance that Mark Zuckerberg testified in Congress. And one can have different views about what the quality of that testimony was, but I think that there is both a carrot and a stick here for Congress to play. One is the carrot of essentially saying, we're behind you, we're going to be behind you in ways that allow the technology and innovation to move forward, and we're not going to sort of smother the baby at birth. The stick is that, much surprising as it might find it on some days, Silicon Valley is part of the United States of America, and it does have obligations here. And I think that it's sometimes necessary to make that clear to Silicon Valley, and I don't think it needs to be done with sort of a heavy stick that essentially distances it from the rest of the society. But I do believe that letting Silicon Valley know that specifically with regards to the place where it lives, if you're going to play in society with big data, with things that affect every single one of us who's got an Amazon account, you got to play by society's rules, and those rules are going to be made by society. And then finally, I guess I'd say it looks to me unavoidable that there be an open conversation at this stage about what the obligations and the limits of obligations of global tech companies are to places where we have real objections to how they might be doing business. I think we should be cooperating much more with the Europeans, and I think they are ahead of us on certain things in relation to privacy and explainability in AI, and I think we actually ought to be looking to them as an example of where we should be going in some of those things.
Thank you all. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate your expertise. We need you. We'd ask if you'd stay in touch with us with suggestions or ideas of what we can do to move forward in this. But I really do want to thank you for being a part of this. And with that, the commission is adjourned. Thank you.